Homelessness in America. The total number of people experiencing homelessness is at its lowest value on record, with places like Mississippi, whom have a homelessness rate of 5 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. It makes the homelessness issue seem to be as though it is becoming less of a problem, but it is the exact opposite. These numbers only show positivity due to the fact that the growth of our overall population is outpacing the growth of homelessness. This is all according to the National Alliance to End Homelessness. While a majority of cities are seeing a decrease in their homeless population, places such as Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle are seeing an increase to the homeless population. According to the article, Is Seattle's Homelessness Crisis the Worst in the Country?, published by the Seattle Times, Seattle has a homelessness rate of 54 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. To compare with other cities, Los Angeles has 59 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. San Francisco has 79 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. New York City has 90 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. And Washington, D.C. has a whopping 110 homeless persons per every 10,000 residents. These numbers all make Seattle sound like the homeless problem is not that big of a deal. But all this data was collected on a single night back in December of 2017, only counting the homeless living in shelters, not counting all of the homeless that are living outside or in cars. In fact, almost half of Seattle's homeless population lives outside, making it harder to count everyone. But it becomes more complicated. Seattle has small communities that do not fit within its city limits evenly. These become continuums of care. Due to the way these smaller communities work together to get government funding, it makes counting the homeless much more complicated than it needs to be. Therefore, when it comes down to collecting data for the homeless in these areas, many times, if it is complicated, the data won't be collected for that area, even if it is in the Seattle city limits, which in turn creates false or mal-collected data. By taking away all complications from collecting data, Seattle would jump from 54 homeless persons to 121 homeless persons per 10,000 residents, easily exceeding Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Every year, volunteers search the streets of America's cities, counting the homeless. This year, for the first time ever, survey teams in Seattle were joined by homeless guides, paid to help the count be as accurate as possible. Vitaly Zhelezny has lived on the streets for 2 years. His story is not unusual.
I lost my employment, I lost my family, and do drugs, and it's how I ended up homeless.
Now 4 weeks clean, Vitaly and survey colleague Lisa cruise the streets. Doorways, street corners, tents and even vehicles are where an increasing number of people sleep. Some 3,000 every night in Seattle, according to a 2016 survey.
We're counting people experiencing homelessness tonight to bear witness, to enumerate them so that we can make policy decisions and really know how many people are out there, what the need is, and what kind of services and housing are needed.
Homelessness is more visible than ever in Seattle. Those working with the homeless see one basic cause.
45,000 households in Seattle pay more than 50% of their income on rent. That means they are one check away from potentially being homeless.
The problem is so severe in Seattle that the mayor declared a state of emergency in November 2015. One solution has been the establishment of official camps that include both tents and so-called tiny huts. 200 yards away, a small group of tents sit atop a bank, barely visible from the nearby road. Homeless for 4 years, Tom has one basic desire.
Having a decent place to live, maybe giving something back to the community, and try to help people, to help them out.
Tom is working with an outreach worker from one of Seattle's many groups helping the homeless. If all goes well, that decent place to live may be somewhere around the corner.
I got my fingers crossed.
In the article, we need to break some rules to fix Seattle's homelessness crisis. From the Seattle Times. In the article, Dale Sperling, a private real estate professional, was interviewed. He had a proposal to make more shelter for the homeless. The project was jump-started with a $1 million grant from Paul Allen. His idea was to make steel apartment modules that could be stacked like Legos, according to the Seattle Times. The concept was each unit would come pre-fabricated with everything needed in it, all made in a factory, then shipped to where it is needed, all for just $100,000. A third of the price of what a traditional apartment unit would cost to make. The grant from Paul Allen was for a 13-unit demonstration of the apartments, meant to be built in a church parking lot. But 2 years after the introduction of the idea, it was put on indefinite hold. According to Sperling, the project fell victim to his early learning mistakes and a whirlwind of regulations that were imposed on his never-done-before idea. After viewing over all the regulations, Sperling had no other option but to halt the entire idea. As stated by the Seattle Times, this couldn't be made to work even with $1 million free bucks is distressing. In Seattle's new head tax, which is meant to help the homeless, the money raised will only be able to provide about 600 new housing for the homeless, far less than what the proposed idea could have built. After going through this, Sperling says, "We need to break some rules. If there's one big thing wrong with how Seattle is going about this, it's that we're trying to do it the way we've always done it." Although there has been failure in the past and the numbers may look bleak for Seattle, there are still ways that this issue can be taken care of. One way to help the homelessness issue here at home would be pushing our own Seattle government to work on legislation that can help limit the amount of regulations, so noble projects like Dale Sperling's project do not get shut down in the future. Another way to try to regain grip on the slipping rope of homelessness is to try to work by the standard of functional zero. Functional zero is a standard that indicates that homelessness is rare and much briefer than in the past for a city's population. As according to the New York Times, Rockford, Illinois solved its homelessness problem by following this simple standard. Not only was it this standard that helped Rockford, but also the way it recorded data. For the first time, the community collected real-time data on the homeless, as well as interacted with the homeless to try to find a solution on how to commonly solve this rapidly growing issue. The homeless were not just recorded as numbers either. They were recorded as real people in a by-the-name list. According to Angie Walker, the city housing advocate, said, "You have to figure out what is important to people. That's the big thing, making it personal. In order to reach the goal of zero homelessness, the data that is collected is critical, but the data that is collected needs to be on the name basis in real time, more than just who is actively homeless." With a lot more time, I could elaborate more on this dire issue and ways to solve it. But for right now, this can just be the beginning of what can become a long talk for a better Seattle.